The Amsterdam Torture Museum, Episode 4, within Part 1. We've got more images and more analysis. We left off with the whipping post, and as I mentioned in the previous episode, this appears to be the real deal, much like many, if not all, the instruments on display. And that adds authenticity. That makes things real. This is not simply a drawing of a whipping post or a photograph. It is the very object. And that's what we look for, is authenticity in the experience of museums and exhibitions. And here you see the executioner about ready to unleash a single blow. You can see he's dressed up, which allows him to stand out as different from other people, which is a symbol of his special status. Well, you heard me say a few times that when it comes to thinking up ways to inflict pain, punishment, and cruelty on another human being, there is no shortage of ideas. Now, as we gaze at this instrument of torture, can you imagine, can you visualize how this item might be put into use? Looks like a musical instrument. Well, that's part of the semiotic nature of the flute of shame. According to tradition, the flute of shame was a punishment for bad musicians. I have to pause. The idea of inflicting punishment on musicians is one that creates a lot of anxiety and concern. But let's continue. We should not take this too literally, though, because incompetent craftsmen were, in the worst case, also excluded from their guild. The penalty was especially intended for showmen and other troublesome folk, disturbing public morals. Depending on the seriousness of the violation, the finger screws could be tightened. The flute of shame. All right. That appears to be the real deal. Authenticity. And this engraving gives you an idea of how this instrument was attached to the victim. And you can see the local people staring, laughing, having a real chuckle. Again, it's funny as long as it's not you. What is this? It even looks dangerous. Let's look at how it will be applied to the victim. You see there's a leather strap that is fastened around the neck that secures this instrument, which is known as the heretic's fork, protruding in the throat, upwards into the lower chin. Why on earth would someone attach a fork on another human being? Well, let's look at some historical explanation. And there it is. The heretic fork. Moral and religious forces at play. I renounce, the inscription on the side of the fork reads, with the sharp points pressed against the hollow of the chin. Accused heretics could scarcely have done more than whisper this formula of penance. Thus the executioner would cause the heretic to be reminded of the painful precision. What most evil quality of his attitude, his stubbornness. The most dangerous heresies had to be renounced secretly prior to one's execution. The culprit thereby forfeited his life, but his soul would be saved. Now, there's a lot going on in this statement. Let me jump around a little bit. Saving the soul. Oftentimes, this motive, this rationale, was intended to deliver salvation. The body can be dispensed, as we talked about in the last episode. It can be seized and shaped. It can be destroyed, exterminated. But the essence is the soul. It's been often said that during some executions in medieval times, that after a hanging, for example, the executioner would break all the major bones of the corpse, so as to prevent the devil from finding something tangible to grab onto, the soul. The evil quality, the most dangerous heresies had to be renounced secretly. This idea that these heresies have their own dangerous energy, that the confessor has to contain that cultural, dangerous energy by enclosing it in secrecy. Now, we can talk more about that later, but I'm just giving you an idea of how analysis allows us to think more broadly and more critically about punishment and torture. The heretic fork. This is the garrote, a horrific device. Now, I'm going to magnify this image because I want you to see that at the back of this pillar is a vise with handles that can be rotated, allowing the screw on this side of the wooden frame to enter the spinal cord. It's a combination of strangulation and the infliction of paralysis, ultimately death. Somebody had to come up with that idea. The garrote. Witches, once again, moral and religious forces, this notion of evil amongst us that is embodied in women. The witches, sentenced to the stake, burned to death. The actual execution could take place. Strangulation with a rope or by an iron ring. Subsequently, there would be a symbolic execution by way of cremation to ashes and dust, after which the remains would be drowned in the river. In this way, authorities hoped to prevent the demonic power from continuing its essence in the degenerate body. Thus, in contrast to the criminals that deserved death by way of fire, such as arsonists, they would undergo a burial in the earth, which would be a more formal and honorable form of disposal. The curators do a pretty good job of capturing the vocabulary of the cultural sociology. Symbolic execution. The degenerate body. This is the polluted body. This is the body that has to be controlled. It has to be eliminated. It has to be exterminated. Do you want to see that panel up here on the left-hand side? Why not? There you go. Notice that the victim in the garret is also holding a cross, a crucifix, as a symbolic reminder of the rationale for his execution. And we have another image. This woman is being garroted. You can see the executioner located behind. He's tightening the vice. She's being strangled, and she is also suffering a lethal spinal injury. It's a two-pronged approach. Strangulation and spinal cord injury. That is the garret. I think we should take another pause. This is a lot of complex material covering a lot of social theory, but also a lot of tangible evidence of punishment, torture. Let's pause right there.